My name is Doreen Tinajero. I serve as the Senior Project Manager at the Center for Social Solutions here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I think learning and educating myself about different things is ongoing. How much time we have to dedicate to that learning process in a formal way and an informal way is it just ebbs and flows with the curves of your life, right? But if it's something that for me, it's something that I love to do and keep on doing, I don't think there's going to be I don't know what point on the circle I'm at yet. I have 2 bachelors, or incomplete bachelors from Studio Albany, and I had to take time away to come back home to deal with family things, and landed a job. Then through that job, I was able to complete a different bachelor's with a completely different major, and the idea of going to graduate school was in the back of my mind, but then opportunities at this employment turned for me, and so the ability to travel the world seemed like a different type of education that I wanted to pursue, and fortunate enough to have someone else underwrite that. Then as I was there, I pursued a master's degree at NYU, which I've completed. And then the opportunity at work turned again, and I was able to come to the University of Michigan with the then president and now director of the center to help him establish the center that we have now. I occupied a lot of time and a lot of positions. My former employment, I had about 5 different jobs, and the last one was bifurcated. I was working in a program area of international higher education. We were grant making, and I also did a discrete project I was managing a discrete project for the president, and he decided that it was time to go back to academia for him, and he was coming home. He was coming here. He's not originally from Michigan, but served multiple roles here, and said, I want to start a center. Is anybody interested? And there was a few people in the president's office, and I was the only one that said, okay, let's give it a shot. What do we have to do? And he said, we need to establish a center. Like, okay. So I was jumping states. I was leaving my family. I had to learn the ins and outs of higher education as an institution. Coming from private philanthropy, that was way different. But I jumped in with feet first. It is now going through the phases of, looking for funding and expanding our projects and expanding our team with those projects. But the bulk of my job, of what I came here to do, is coming to an end. And so now I'm focusing on what else or what is next, right? And so how do I use the skills that I learned here and the relationships and the learnings, right, of being in such a massive institution and taking that and pivoting to a different industry, a different sector, maybe a different university. It will determine how close or how far I am from my family, and they're getting older. So my priority is a little bit more complicated. For me in particular, I think it's been a fantastic opportunity to meet people in a different sector, opening my eyes to different jobs that I could potentially have, figuring out my value add to different types of jobs, of employment, of sectors. So I think, generally speaking, it's what one makes of the opportunity, right? If they're open to it. And for me in particular, I know that I will have some of the relationships that I've built here over time, they'll last beyond this job and beyond the city and beyond, this institution. I'm currently in that place where I'm trying to evaluate, do I stay in higher education? Do I go back to philanthropy? Do I enter government space or private space? Taking inventory of my skill set and figuring out where the value add is, both for the institution or the organization, as well as myself. I mean, I'm probably prioritizing myself over the organization as I move into the next decade of my life. I would have said what I learned, right? The opportunities that opened themselves up for me and that I took, or other opportunities that I fit my way into because it wasn't offered, right? And figured out how to get into it. And now with a little bit more perspective, I would say the relationships that I've made along the way, both personal and professional. Some of my best friends are my college roommates, right? Some of my professional relationships are what pivoted me here and will be a springboard for where I go next. So I alluded to it earlier. I did attend the SUNY Albany, did not complete my degree there because I had to come home, or home at the time. And it was a family situation, and the way I was raised and the decisions that I made were based on family and prioritizing that family. So even before I prioritized myself or my learning or figuring out what was important to me, family was probably the first and most. And it called me back. I wasn't able to complete. And once you leave, especially in abroad, not in abroad, on-campus situation, I went from being in the city to upstate New York, and you remove yourself and you go back to what you remember, what you recall, and what you found comfortable. It was a lot more difficult to pick up and go back upstate and finish what I was doing. I thought that I would do it in New York, in the city, and so one thing led to another, and then work popped up, and more the need for work popped up. So it changed the trajectory. I would say that was probably the biggest hurdle. Would I would have wanted to complete my studies? Sure. One and done, maybe even do graduate school there at the time, but life is not always, mapped out the way you think it is. It's a first gen mentality, I think. And it is a priority that my parents, said should be a priority, right? And so besides your family, it's your education. They came from elsewhere to make things better and easier for me to a certain extent, but I had to put in the work. And so that was drilled in me long before I even thought about college, right? It was something that was built into me. It was inculcated, right? And then missing that sort of opportunity to make those decisions and come back home and deal with family was, I don't want to say a setback, but at the time, with the priorities that I had, it was a setback. So in the back of my mind, I knew I was going to get there. I had to. It was something that was taught to me, but something I believed in. Like now I thought of it as a fact, or at that time I thought of it as a fact that I needed to finish school. And so I knew that I would. How that would happen, up to the stars, right? Figuring out the path was a little bit harder than I anticipated, but yeah, I always knew that I would complete my studies and get a graduate degree. How much time it took, how much it cost, all those other things we would figure out along the way. But it wasn't a break that I was looking for. Just growing up first gen, I became resourceful at a very young age. Learning English and helping my parents with English, along the way, was something that was important. I was a person that figured out how the VCR works when VCRs were a thing, right? My dad would pass me the manual and say, figure it out. I'm like, okay, great, So I think that resourcefulness was bred in me a very long time before I kind of had mapped out what my future would look like. And as I went through the ups and downs of school, of high school, of college, I realized that no one was going to tell me how this worked unless I figured it out myself. My parents didn't have a learned experience here. They had the Army, they had secretarial school, so they had different versions of what that looked like. So if I wanted to do what I needed to do, I was going to have to figure it out myself. And so I think to an extent, my parents, wholly, they taught it to me. And then I figured if I want certain things that weren't going to be sort of spelled out or just given to me, I was going to have to figure out what I needed to know. We kind of go around not knowing what we don't know. I felt at a young age I had to figure out what those things were to the extent that I could find, at the age of 15 or 20 or whatever it was. So I would say resourcefulness is something that I learned through need. Had the informal jobs, like being the tutor in the building where I worked. A couple of neighbors had kids that were younger than me and they needed help, right? And so I would get paid in like food or earrings or, goods. Not necessarily paid monetarily. And then my first actual job was something that I inherited from my sister. She worked as a pharmacist assistant. That pharmacy is now closed, and I did not cross any laws, but I was given way too much responsibility for a 15, 16-year-old. I always did the right thing, but in retrospect, I don't know how anyone would keep a license. I did a lot of the pharmacist work, from like putting in the scripts to like bottling up the medication. So yeah, I remember that job quite vividly. The title is not as indicative of all the work that I do, but I help manage a diversity and democracy book series. So we find authors to speak to diversity in democratic society, by topic, help them come up with the parameters of the manuscript, work with the publishing house to get it published, and then execute some launches around the publications, the promotions and marketing of the publication. And we are about 9 titles in out of 10, so we're nearing the end of that race, and having public forums and events that really do get the word out and have these conversations on multiple platforms. That is my day-to-day. The other part of my day-to-day is, learning how to work through the bureaucracy of a big institution while not losing my patience, figuring out how to work within the confines, I think I had a lot more autonomy when I was at my former job. And while I still work with the same supervisor, even though trust is there implicitly, there are boundaries and hurdles that we have to get through here at the university. So that's a lot of my day-to-day. It takes up probably more time than I would like. The other part is fundraising and development and figuring out how to keep the center a center here. So senior project manager really doesn't grab all that, but, the figure it out person. Well, I started in Queens, New York, by virtue of my parents, and I think I was exposed to quite a lot, emotionally and physically, regionally, at a young age. And by that I mean my favorite sort of realization as I've been getting older is, I went to Catholic school like most Latino kids who can afford it, right? Whose parents could afford it, because it served to instill the fear of God, somewhat of a babysitter, and definitely saving money on clothing, right? So it was a win-win-win for my family. And so we would have some savings, right? And my father and my mother prioritized that. And so every summer we would go to a different country, and travel as much of the world as we could, learning and absorbing other cultures, other practices and traditions. Not always comfortable, figuring out, like, realizing how good we had it, even though we were just making it. And then also wanting for more, being exposed to like the other side of things. I'm like, oh, this is what they do. That's interesting. Or they don't have to, save up all year to do this. That's interesting too. So I think that really informed who I was going to be, or who I am. And so this sort of ever wanting to learn more about the world and about things and about processes, while also sort of relating to doing good in the world, I think has shaped who I was. I think that has a lot to do with my family and the priorities that my parents had and how they structured our house. Really gave me the motivation to kind of keep that going. I think I mentioned earlier that I took a pivot. I thought I was going to go to grad school. I had that other job, but that job sort of expanded to traveling for the foundation on their behalf, and I was able to see half the globe that way, you know, with the projects that we had in other countries. And so that sort of life student or global student, I think really had its day when someone else was giving you the opportunity to do so. And so I found myself there and really enjoying learning through experience. Hard to do in a classroom, but also have the foresight to marry both what you learn in a classroom and in the world, to figure out what you want to do next and where you want to go and how to be where you're at. You know, you mentioned something earlier about embracing where you are, and while I didn't think Michigan was going to be the full stop for me, it's not. I've learned to embrace Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, which is my area, and Saline. I live sort of in the middle of those three, but giving back to community. And so I volunteer at Safe House, and it's the shelter and for domestic violence and sexual abuse. And so embrace the city, embrace the community that I live in, right? Give back for the real estate that I'm absorbing right now, right? And so someone else will take my place when I'm done, but really giving back to the community that serves me as much as I serve it. What I remember was Catholic school. I mean, my mom and my father immigrated from different countries. My dad's Ecuadorian and my mom's Honduran. I woke up in Queens, and I made mention before that Catholic schools and nonprofits kind of helped shape the ability for me to go to school, to be under supervision. And the nonprofit was the NAACP that had like a find the babysitter service, right? And so both parents went off to work, and when I wasn't in extracurricular activities, you know, I needed someone to watch me from 3 to 6, right? And so we found a lovely Ecuadorian family through the same means, and it was local to the school. So really had a full Catholic school experience, along with some time with an Ecuadorian family that was somewhat religious, right? And so I think that's an important sort of proponent of how I grew up and how I was guided, right? And graduated in the 8th grade, as most Catholic schools go through K through 8, and then went to a religious high school. It wasn't all Catholic, but it was Christian, St. John's Preparatory, and went there for 4 years. Again, it was very helpful to my parents. The fear of God was still sort of stretched out till my teen years, right? And also I had a dress code. And so it really did a lot for us being able to, for me to get the education that I was getting, and also the supervision that was important to my parents. I grew up in the 80s, so I was a latchkey kid. Didn't have a lot of the tech that we have now. Didn't have any of the tech that we had now. And so my parents relied on me getting home and calling them at their office or their job and saying, hey, I'm home, you know, not murdered, I'm fine. You know, it was New York City in the 80s, right? And then it was in high school that I think that I realized, oh, you know, I have options for college. I don't have to go to somewhere local the way I did for high school. I think the scholarships also helped, right? And every time I got a scholarship, I minimized like how far out or to the school that I wanted to go to, because it was really dependent on how much funding I received at other schools that I probably wouldn't have chosen, you know, directly or immediately. And so I realized that without going and visiting colleges and universities, that I had options, that I could figure out what I wanted to study, figure out who I was outside of this sort of like hovering of like Catholicism and parents and family and extended family, right? Figuring out like who and what I wanted to be. I went to the school that gave me the most money though, because that's a real thing. And so I went upstate and really learned how to be an adult there. learning how to wash your clothes properly, having enough money to do it. Really creating your own schedule without someone hovering over you or reminding you or waking you up and saying like, hey, you've got to get to class, or you could skip it, but what is that midterm going to look like, So making decisions that were pivotal to my becoming better, becoming informed, being educated, sometimes making good decisions, sometimes making bad decisions, but all within the sort of process of growing up. I didn't have the luxury of going to school with siblings or with, they were older than I was, so we wouldn't have fallen into the same category anyway. But I didn't go to college or university with any of my cousins, and I have a pretty large, extended family. So the concept of chosen family was a big deal, and created the guardrails of life, I think, when you are able to choose your family and figure out, who cares about you and who doesn't, right? What's prioritized in their house and what's not. I came up in the age of like, if you leave together, you come back together, right? I don't know that happens anymore. I'm not quite sure. I definitely don't go out as much as I used to, right? But we didn't leave our girlfriends behind. Like we showed up together. We're going to have to answer to someone's parents individually, so we need to come back together. And so I think that all was kind of learned while I was away, because we didn't have parents in a household to kind of fall back on or say like, hey, can you please pick me up as an emergency situation? It was like, you figure this out. You're on your own, right? This is what it means to be on your own. So that dictated what kind of decisions you made as you get older, as you experience the things that you wanted to and didn't want to experience as a result, right? So I think that was incredibly formative. And then coming back to New York, before I could finish my degree and getting a job and dealing with family kind of catapulted me into like a different area of adulthood, maybe that I wasn't ready for, but another learning experience, like that's what it's all about, I think. And not so much falling or making mistakes, but like how you get up from it, how you deal with it, what you turn those lessons into, right? More guidelines for your future self, or maybe you don't learn the lesson and you do it again. So I think that was a good part of my path, was really not wanting to make the same mistakes twice, and learning from them as much as they hurt, figuring out what you did and did not want to do, or what I wanted and didn't want to do, both educationally and work-wise. I was in the workforce now. I'm like, am I gonna be this person like kind of churning out things for a paycheck and living paycheck to paycheck, or am I going to think bigger? Am I going to be bigger, right? So I think that job was also a learning curve in so many ways, figuring out, am I a doer or a thinker? Can I be both? How do I get compensated? How do you have the confidence to figure out your value when maybe you're not being championed, right? And figuring out that part for yourself. So I think beyond college, beyond university, life is your education, right? The decisions you make have consequences, and how you fare from them is also a learning experience, right? How you, what the impact does to you personally, and how you apply different things to kind of safeguard yourself going forward without losing that sense of adventure or that sense of wanting to know more, with wanting to be safe and making maybe better financial decisions. The biggest influence on my education starts with my family, starts with my parents and what they prioritized and what they, basically what they demanded, right? Like, you're gonna go to college or university. Some parts of those conversations were not like, fact-finding and like, how do I feel about things? It was more of like a mandate, right? You're going to college. We did all of the sacrificing for you to have a better life, so now you have to earn your part of it, right? And I don't think that's a terrible place to be. I definitely couldn't have that conversation about a gap year. I didn't even know what that was, right? And that absolutely would not have flown in my house. But anyway, I think My parents had a lot of influence, as did my peers. I think figuring out the different personalities that you meet at college, right? And we like to say type A and type B, but like people come influenced by different factors, right? And some people just wanted to make money. Some people just wanted to do good in the world. And some people wanted to go to the Peace Corps and, live that kind of hippie-ish, do good life, right? Some people believed in public service. They became lawyers, but they worked for the court systems because they saw the disparity and maybe they had experienced it, right? So they wanted to be that change. So I think a lot of that also influenced, like, what do I want, right? And how do I want to do this? And can I afford to do this? Like, I would love to work for a nonprofit. Will that pay my rent? I'm not sure. It depends on the nonprofit, I suppose, right? I spoke about being resourceful earlier, and it was, you got to figure it out or you sink, right? You sink or swim type of thing. And at least that's the way I was raised, or that's how I felt my circumstances were, right? And so if I wanted to get out somewhere, if I wanted to do something, I was going to have to figure it out myself because my parents don't really have time for it. They don't know enough about it. They didn't have connected friends, and so part of that is access, right? Knowing what is out there, what you qualify for, what the criteria is, what does criteria mean, right? Like simple things like that we take for granted. When you're 17, maybe not so simple, right? And figuring out like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. No, that does not qualify, and knowing the difference between that, right? So that extra step of like, well, how do I qualify, right? So what do I need to know to know? So all of that is wrapped up in access. If you don't have access to the resources, if you don't have access to the tools, if you don't have access to people that know more than you do, and you're not afraid to ask, you know what I mean? Like, that's where all the information is. Gatekeepers are good and bad, right? It depends on what their intentions are, right? You can ask somebody and tap someone and they'll give you everything they've got in their toolbox, and other people will really kind of maybe hold the resources for themselves or for friends, right? But not include you in that. So I think access plays such a huge role, but so do gatekeepers. Like, so do people to that access, right? So why are you closing doors off? Why don't you promote this a little bit more widely? Why isn't there more steered in that direction to kind of help people understand what the pipeline is? Figuring out what folks don't know and how to become that resource, right? So is it nonprofits? Is it the church? Is it after school program that starts people talking about what you need in the next 5 years, in the next 8 years, in the next 10 years, I think without access, you really run into dead ends. I'm going to start repeating myself. I think it starts at home, right? And how big and how wide your family lets you dream, right? The reality is that a lot of generations come here and then start work, and then the next generation is expected to work. Maybe education is not lauded as it could be, right? Simple fact, like they don't have money to send your kid to college, right? And so you can apply, but then what are you gonna do? Snatch the dream away? That sounds cruel, right? So we work to get better, and we work to have money, and we work to grow, right? And so that's one pathway. But if your parents help you imagine things that maybe they didn't complete, or just give you a whiteboard and just like, go forth, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you think you want to do? What is it that you're good at? How do we hone those skills, right? How do we prepare you? How do we develop you to be the best version of yourself with what we have, right? And then outside of that, I think the city informs you. I grew up as a latchkey kid, right? So the community, the stores, my neighborhood, the violence, the police, everything influenced how I saw things, right? How I lived in the space that I occupied, what it felt like to be a have and a have not, right? I think that has a tremendous impact on young people and allows them to think about how much bigger they can be, or where they need to go if it's not there to grow. Again, a lovely resource if it's afforded to you, right? To be able to go away to college and not have all of the thoughts of like, how am I going to pay this? How am I going to eat, right? How am I going to get back home to see my family, you know? So I think your home is the first place that you get to spread your wings, and then it's your neighborhood and it's your community, and it could be your church community, it could be your neighborhood and your neighbors in the building who found out that I got good grades, and so can you tutor my kid, you know, and I'll pay you in jewelry or earrings or, you know, whatever it is, right? I think I was exposed to the jobs that my parents and my family had, which were very blue collar. And what I think happens in Latin America, maybe, I don't want to close it off to just that, but that's the culture that I know, right? You have three choices. You're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an engineer. And you have a lot of choices within engineering, as we all know in Latin America, but those are your top three. And anything outside of that is like, you're kind of wasting my money and time here. You know, like I did a lot to sacrifice to be here and to have you here to be a better version of us, you know? So no, you can't study the humanities, and no, I don't know what performance art is, you know? I was influenced by my surroundings. I lived in a very Greek neighborhood, and I was Latin American, right? So we didn't have a lot of things in common other than that we were immigrant families, some immigrants older than others in that neighborhood, right? But you would see family, like generational families, blue collar, but they own their companies, right? That was different. And that's something that you learned, like when you heard someone's big brother was taking over his dad's, you know, plumbing business, right? Okay, so I think there's a business model in there somewhere, right? And then you learned about different types of doctors and different types of medicine and Eastern culture versus Western culture, right? And so it starts to slowly sort of open up if you're an inquisitive, curious person, right? I think depends on your family and how tight you follow the rules and how much they allow you to sort of investigate on your own and be that curious person. I also think what you're exposed to besides your neighborhood, as a byproduct of a latchkey kid, I watched a lot of TV, right? There was a lot of sitcoms. There was a lot of shows where people had these wacky jobs, right? And family sitcoms and the like, right? And figuring out like, oh, I could be a public servant, or I could be an acupuncturist, or I could be a mechanic, or I could do what, you know? So it started opening up these sort of windows and these pockets of like possibilities that I think really did more for me in the sense that exposed me to more things. It was just my job to figure out like, oh, I don't want to be a mechanic, but do I want to own the mechanic shop? And so what does that look like, you know? I would say your community influences you a lot, but how you're socialized, the TV you're watching, the music you're listening to, you know, the people that you talk to in your building or the houses next door or elsewhere. Looking back, I could see how it was a deterrent at first. You have to calibrate the time and place, right? What immigration looked like, how it was embraced or not embraced, what it looked like in Catholic school when you're one of two brown kids, right? Not knowing what type of brown, right? I feel that it wasn't a benefit to me. It was something that they knew and something that if I didn't get a right answer, it must be a language barrier, right? As I got older, I realized, and I think it was more of an accepted benefit, if you spoke a different language, you can switch code switch rather, a lot easier. You can talk to a subset of your friends without everyone else knowing. You could also pass those language proficiency tests with ease, right? Because you've been trained at home this entire time and you can take whatever curriculum the school had. And so it was to my benefit as I moved through even university. I mean, I was able to take the exams for Spanish proficiency and then move into French. And there is a somewhat of a similarity, so that kind of helped me leverage what I knew from the Latin background into French. I think now it's seen as a plus depending on the employer, I suppose. But I also see how the benefits go both ways. I volunteered for something at the medical school, and I don't know that they continue it on every year. I guess it depends on who's doing the applications for undergraduate or maybe the medical school. I don't know what their years look like, year fours, when they have to deal with patients. And so being aware that the demographics have proved that Latinos are the majority now, they also have to be able to have a bedside manner in Spanish and really be able to communicate the intricacies as well as like the big, heavy sort of topics of things to a Spanish-speaking person that might not have that sort of accessibility to English. So we practice, and so I will be, you know, the 69-year-old smoker from Minneapolis, you know, and the student has to tell me, you know, what I need to do and how to follow up, and I'm asking, you know, ¿por qué? And ¿cómo? And no entiendo. So I think I try to use the benefit for to benefit others, right? Help them be better doctors and serve my community a little bit better, hopefully, fingers crossed. I mean, I'm thinking about the age you are when you get here, about 17, 18. You're in your formative years. You'll be there for a little while longer. I would say hold on to it. I think people are quick to wash it away and learn English and be more proficient because that is the competitive nature of anywhere, like a college or university, especially at the University of Michigan. You want to do well, and for that you need a command of English or certain version of a command of English, right? But I think that sometimes people will try to not speak their native language or not promote it or not be proud of it to a certain extent. I hope that's not the case. I've seen and I've heard, I actually have friends that were never taught Spanish at home because we're in America and we're going to learn English and that's what we're going to embrace. And so you can't code switch with that person. You can't say something in Spanish on the low, right? And try to get a point across because they'll say, what? What do you mean, what? So hold on to your traditions and they're who you are, right? You don't want to whitewash that. Hold on to things and messages that say that you're good at something, that you're promising, that you did that well. Chances are you're still young between K through 12 that you can leverage that skill into something stronger, real as a profession maybe, who knows. Don't be discouraged by what you think you can't do. Hold on to that compliment or that piece of advice because it allows you to dream bigger. It allows you to become resourceful and figure out, like, how do I get that arts scholarship or that writing retreat, whatever, you know? I think there's not enough reinforcement when it comes to those things because we're cattled in this way to make money-making jobs, right? Towards being able to be financially sound, which is not a bad thing, right? And also it is very difficult, right, to sustain that. You might not be connected like somebody next to you is, and you could probably do a better job of it, right? But they'll never know because they're not going to pick you, right? So I just think you should lean into what people recognize in you at an early age, because sometimes you don't recognize that about yourself, right? You think it's a one-off, or you think like this is never going to fly at home, or like this is a hobby, you know? It's okay if it's a hobby, but it could turn into your profession. You just don't know, right? But you should allow yourself to kind of breathe life into that when you can, if you can, right? But I wouldn't listen to the discouragement as much as I would listen and hold on to those like sparkles, right? Every so often, that shine that you get from time to time when someone sees something sparkly in you or potential in you. Learn to recognize it, I guess. I mean, I think it's hard to say that to a child, right? But if it feels good inside, right, it's telling you something, right? It becomes visceral and you want more of it. And so maybe that's a sign that's telling you to like hold on to something that you could be promising in this way, right? If you just nurture it. all of this is in retrospect, right? It holds so much value for me because of the relationships that I've made, the lessons that I've learned about myself, about the growth that I had, because I had to, right? Because you deal with the consequences of your actions, like we said earlier. I also think that it is valuable to learn something outside of that track that your parents put you on sometimes, or that you think that you're locked into because this is the only way to make money, or this is the only thing that's going to make someone else proud, right? You have to be able to wake up and really want to do something that day, right? And if you get up and you don't want to do it, it's time to change jobs, it's time to change your life. It's time to change something, right? So I think in retrospect, college was incredibly invaluable to me because of the relationships that I've made and the growth that I had through the classroom learning, through, being on time and, hitting deadlines and making friends with people outside of your comfort zone and who maybe don't share all of the traditions and the rituals that you had growing up, right? It helped me, I think, become an adult in ways that, sometimes you're not ready for and sometimes you are, or it's overdue. But I think I found that healthy balance of like becoming who I was going to be in college. And that happened at a 4-year institution. I think it's incredibly valuable to go through the ups and downs of it, the good and the bad. It's just how you come out the other side of it that really matters, right? Both of my parents combined don't have a 4-year degree. I think my father ended up getting an accounting associate's degree. And my mother had secretarial schooling. I wouldn't say that was a degree the way we quantify it here in the US, but it was her only formal learning past high school. They both came, and then my dad had, back in the day, he had to do military service in Ecuador. So right after that was over, he and my mom, at kind of around the same time, just a different country, were realizing that the U.S. was becoming this, American dream place, this big melting pot. And so they applied for their visas. They got indefinite, not like 10-year visas that they have now, and then their green card, and then they became citizens. And so they came looking for a bigger, better life. So they don't have a 4-year degree, but they have a life diploma. I went into college at university thinking that I was going to do X, Y, and Z, right? Because that's what you're trained to think. You can explore, you can imagine, you can, fantasize about certain things. But then you take organic chem and you're like, whoa, what? So I was one of those kids, right? And so I had to pivot and figure myself out. But community college is fantastic. I mean, it just lets you figure out what you like and what you don't like and who you want to be and if you want to continue or if you want to work. I think it has this sort of connotation that it's where people that can't make it go, or people that don't have a lot of money go, or that, they're kind of lost, right? All of these sort of negative connotations, as opposed to a big 4-year private Ivy, whatever, that your parents have in their mind as like the ultimate, right? They're not going through it, you are, right? And so I wish I could have had that pushback with my parents. That wasn't going to be a discussion we had, just like not having a gap year. That wasn't going to happen either. But I just think it would have given me so much latitude to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Would I be here right now? I have no idea. But I do kind of secretly fantasize about that. Like, where would I have gone? Would I have gone out of state? Would I've, been a product of my environment if I went out of state? What state would that have been? Would have been like a train ride away at Hunter or not Hunter, like BCC, and would I have become faculty? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't know. I feel like that space gives you a lot of latitude to kind of figure out where you want to go. And if you really like school and you really still have that sort of priority, underpinning your educational process, you apply to a 4-year school and you're halfway done, right? And so it's not the end all, and it's not the negative connotation that I think people have with it. Hopefully they don't have that connotation anymore, but I don't know. Yeah, I think the same way maybe that community colleges are being celebrated now in different ways, right? I'm hoping that that's the case and that sticks, even though we ebb and flow, right? It goes up and down, what the market looks like and what we champion and what we don't, that'll change over time, right? But I hope that community college stays the length and people can understand the genius behind it, right? And so like you could do so many more things if you did this, right? Mostly because it's your formative years. You're becoming an adult, which is sometimes put into fast forward for some kids, and sometimes it takes forever to get there, right? And so I just think that it's a safe place to be while you're figuring yourself out and you're growing up to be the adult that you're going to be. I also think that we don't put enough emphasis on, the university of life. I think experiential learning is the way some people flourish, right? It's just as valuable as that humanities class or that social science class or that engineering class, to understand how you pick yourself up from losses, right? And how you carry that lesson and how you take that impact and make it something worth inquiring about yourself, like going forward, right? Like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. What can I learn from it? How do I apply this? What else can I do so that this doesn't happen, or was this really meant to be the way it was meant to be? You know what I mean? Like, you can ask all of those questions and really sort of inform what your next steps look like, whether it be personal, professional, educationally. I just think that is life, right? And so a lot of people just like to highlight the mistakes, but they don't talk about what it looks like to come through it on the other side and what you do with it, right?